Hello again everybody and welcome to Native English with Chris. One of the questions that I get asked the most often by my students is what's the difference between British English and American English? And this is a very good question because there are many differences. So in today's lesson I'm going to teach you about some of the differences and you're going to be able to do a little test to see whether you speak British English or American English. For example, just take a look at this picture. Now, what would you call these? These have a different name depending on whether you're from Britain or America. So in Britain, we call these trainers, and in the USA, they call these sneakers. Now, I'm not going to try to do the American accent in today's lesson, so all of the American words are going to be in my British accent because I don't want to embarrass myself. So if you call these things trainers, maybe you speak more British English. And if you call these things sneakers, maybe you speak more American English. Also, just before we get started, could I ask you to please subscribe to my channel? It will help me a lot in growing the channel so that I can keep bringing these lessons to you. It's important to note that whether you speak British English or American English, both are correct, both are acceptable forms of English. It just depends on where you're from and what your preference is. Most people are usually exposed to more American English because they watch TV shows and movies, and most of these use American English because they're filmed in the USA. So there are four main differences between British English and American English. These are vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and spelling. Now the video would be way too long if I tried to go through all of these different areas today, and you'd probably get bored of my face by the end of it. So for today's lesson we're going to focus on the differences in vocabulary, and then in the future I will make a series of videos focusing on the other three areas: the grammar, the pronunciation, and the spelling. So let's get started. What would you call this? Now there are a few different words for this. In the UK, in British English, we call this a flat usually, and in the USA, they usually call this an apartment. So here's the next picture. Can I have a little think for what you would call this? So in the UK, we call this a lorry, and in the USA, they call this a truck. And the next picture, and this is the most important picture, the most important word of all the words in the language. Of course, I'm joking, but for me, I love this sport. This is my favourite sport, and I'm sure most of you know this difference. It's a very common difference. So obviously in the UK, in British English, we call this football, and in the USA, in American English, they call this soccer. That's the only time today I'm going to try to put on an American accent. It's also worth noting that in the USA, they do use the word football, but this is a completely different sport. They call it American football, and in this game, they use their hands to throw the ball. So I'm not really sure why they call it football, but they do. So here's the next picture. One of my favourite foods here. I love this as a snack. What would you call this? So in British English, we call these crisps. And in American English, they call these chips. So on to the next picture, which is related to this. Another type of food. What would you call these? So in British English, we call these chips. But in American English, and probably the most widely used word for these, they call them French fries, like you get in McDonald's. So yeah, in the UK we use both crisps and chips, but they are different types of food. And in the USA they don't use the word crisps, they use the words chips and French fries. So here's the next picture. So if you eat too many crisps and too many chips and too many French fries, you might have to go to this place because you might have some heartburn. What would you call this place? In the UK, we call it a chemist or a pharmacy. But in the USA, they call this a drugstore. So on to the next picture now. This is the place where you walk next to the road as a pedestrian. And in British English, we call this the pavement. But in American English, which is often a little bit more descriptive, they call this the sidewalk, which makes sense because you walk at the side of the road. I'm not really sure where the word pavement comes from, but this is what we call it. So as I said, yeah, American English is often a lot more descriptive. I once watched a comedian who was making fun of American English because they take British words like pavement and they just change them to make sure that people understand what to do. Sidewalk, you walk at the side of the road. And the next one, this picture, so the sport of riding horses. In British English, we call this horse riding. But in American English, they call this horseback riding. Very similar, of course, but just in case you didn't know where to ride the horse, they call it horseback riding. I'm not making fun of American English, by the way. I'm just trying to explain that sometimes it's a little bit more descriptive. So here's the next one. So if you need to buy something, maybe some food or something for your home, in the UK, we just call it a shop. Or if it's for food, it's a supermarket. But in America, they call it a store. Or if it's for food, they call it a grocery store. So the next one, this is a very common one as well. I'm sure most of you know this. This is the thing that takes you up in a building if you don't want to use the stairs. In the UK, we call this a lift. And in the USA, they call it an elevator. So the next one, if you're thirsty and you're feeling unhealthy, you don't want a water, you'd like to have a Coca-Cola or something. In the UK, we call this pop or fizzy pop. But in the US, they call it soda. So we would say, can I have a can of pop? But the Americans would say, can I have a can of soda? This next one, so this is the thing you push your baby in if you're walking down the street. These are very different. In the UK, we call this a PRAM. You might not have heard of that because I don't think it's used very often outside of the UK. The one that you've probably heard of is the American version, which is a stroller. And again, this makes sense because the word stroll means to take a walk. So when you're pushing your stroller, you are strolling. And the next one, so this is the front of the car that you can lift up to look at the engine. What would you call this? In the UK, in British English, we call it the bonnet. But in the USA, in American English, they call it the hood. Yes, the same word as the thing that you put over your head. That's also a hood. And sticking with the theme of cars, here's the next one. So this is at the back of the car, the thing that you open to put your shopping in or to put something else in. In British English, we call this the boot. But in American English, they call this the trunk. The next one, yes, this profession. This is the person that you call if you need some legal work doing or if you need somebody to draw up a contract for you. In the UK, we call these people either solicitors or barristers. They're slightly different, but this is not the video to get into the slight differences there. But in the USA, they call these attorneys or lawyers. Lawyer is the most common word here and probably the word that you all know. And is sometimes used in the UK as well, but we don't use the word attorney in the UK. The next one, if you want to watch a new movie, where do you go? In the UK, we go to the cinema, but in the USA, they go to the movies. And the next one, when you're driving, but you want to drive fast to get somewhere far away, in British English, we call this the motorway. But in American English, they call this the highway or the freeway. And the last one here, if you have some rubbish that you want to throw away, where do you throw it? In British English, we throw it in the bin. But in American English, they throw it in the trash can. So that's the end of the lesson and the test there. So which words did you use more of? Did you use more of the British English words or more of the American English words? Maybe you kept track of how many you got. So if you knew more American English words, that would suggest that you speak more American English. And if you knew more British English words, that would suggest that you speak more British English. Maybe you can let me know in the comments below which type of English you speak and which type of English you prefer, because they might be slightly different. Maybe you speak British English, but you prefer to speak American English, and vice versa. And also let me know if you can think of any other things that are different in British English and American English, things that I haven't mentioned in today's video. So again, if you liked today's video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.